The red warning lights flashed across the bridge of the USS Dakota as Admiral Jake Morrison stared at the holographic display. The numbers were bad, very bad. Out of the thousands of ships that once protected the galaxy, only 55 remained. The rest were floating debris in the cold darkness of space. Morrison ran his hand through his gray hair and looked at the faces around him. His crew had been fighting this war for 3 years. They were tired, scared, and running out of hope. The alien alliance that Earth had joined was falling apart. Species that had ruled the stars for millions of years were being crushed like insects. Commander Lisa Harper stepped up beside him. Her uniform was wrinkled and her eyes showed the strain of too many sleepless nights. She held a data pad in her shaking hands. "Sir, the latest reports are in," she said quietly. "The Zephyrians lost their entire 7th Fleet yesterday. That's 200 bioships gone. The Nexari are pulling back to their home system. They won't fight anymore." Morrison nodded slowly. The Zephyrians were insect-like creatures who grew their ships from living tissue. Those ships could heal themselves and adapt to any weapon. But even they couldn't survive what the Vorth Empire was throwing at them. The crystalline Nexari had energy weapons that could cut through planets. They were retreating too. "What about the Aquarians?" Morrison asked. Harper's face grew darker. "Captain Zextel says his people might surrender. The Vorth destroyed their water worlds. Billions of his people are dead." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what this meant. If the Aquarians gave up, the human fleet would be alone against an enemy that had conquered most of the known galaxy. Morrison walked to the main screen and watched the distant stars. Somewhere out there, 3,000 Vorth ships were heading their way. Each enemy vessel was the size of a city. They had weapons that could crack planets in half. Their dark energy cores could power entire civilizations. "How long do we have?" he asked. 3 days, sir," Harper replied. "Maybe 4 if we're lucky." Morrison had seen the recordings of Vorth attacks. They didn't just defeat their enemies. They wiped them out completely. Entire species vanished from the galaxy. Worlds became empty rocks floating in space. The Vorth took no prisoners and showed no mercy. The bridge doors opened and several alien commanders walked in. Morrison recognized them all. Queen Thasara of the Zephyrians moved on 6 legs, her compound eyes reflecting the red emergency lights. Her chitin armor was cracked from recent battles. General Kethmer of the Nexari floated beside her, his crystal body dim with exhaustion. Captain Zextel of the Aquarians walked slowly, water dripping from his gills. "Admiral Morrison, Queen." Thasara spoke in her clicking voice. "We need to discuss our final strategy." Morrison gestured to the conference table. The alien commanders took their positions around the holographic display that showed their pathetic fleet. 12 capital ships, 43 support vessels, and about 30,000 crew members from a dozen different species. It was all that remained of the Galactic Defense Coalition. General Kethmer's crystal body pulsed with frustrated energy. "Our weapons are useless against them. We've tried everything. Plasma bombardments, gravity weapons, dimensional rifts. Nothing works. Their ships adapt too quickly." Captain Zextel's gills fluttered as he spoke. "My people have decided to surrender. We cannot watch more of our children die for a hopeless cause." Queen Thasara's antenna twitched angrily. "Coward, the Vorth will kill you anyway." "They don't. Keep slaves. Better to die with hope than die for nothing," Zextel replied. Morrison listened to the argument without speaking. He had heard this same debate for weeks. The alien races were giving up. They had fought with honor and courage, but they couldn't imagine victory anymore. The Vorth were too strong, too advanced, too numerous. "What about the humans?" General Kethmer asked suddenly. "Your species has been quiet during these discussions." All eyes turned to Morrison. The alien commanders had never really understood. Humans. Earth was a new member of the coalition. Humans had only been traveling between stars for 50 years. Most alien races had been exploring space for thousands of years. The Vorth avoided your space, Queen Nasara observed. They must think you're too primitive to bother with. Morrison smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. Maybe they're right. Maybe. We are primitive. The aliens looked confused. They expected Morrison to defend his species, or claim that humans were stronger than they appeared. Instead, he walked to his command chair and activated his personal communication system. All human ships, this is Admiral Morrison, report status. The responses came quickly. Captain Danny Wright of the destroyer USS Phoenix reported his ship ready for battle. Commander Kate Stone of the engineering vessel USS Forge confirmed her. Systems were operational. One by one, 27 human ships checked in. The alien commanders looked at each other with confusion. The human fleet was tiny compared to what they had lost. How could Morrison sound so confident? Admiral, Captain Zextal said carefully, your fleet is brave. But 27 ships cannot defeat 3,000 Vorth vessels. It's mathematically impossible. Morrison turned back to face the aliens. His expression was calm, almost peaceful. You're probably right. But we're going to try anyway. Queen Nasara's compound eyes focused on him. You're planning to sacrifice your entire species for a symbolic gesture? No, Morrison replied. I'm planning to win. The silence that followed was complete. Even the ship's engines seemed to quiet. Down. The alien commanders stared at Morrison as if he had lost his mind. 3,000 enemy ships against 27. Weapons that could destroy planets against human technology that was barely a century old. It was insane. General Kethma's crystal body flickered. Admiral, I respect your courage, but courage alone cannot change the laws of physics. The Vorth have never been defeated. Morrison walked back to the holographic display and studied the tactical information. 3 days until the enemy arrived. 3 days to do something that had never been done before. 3 days to prove that sometimes the smallest force could achieve the impossible. You're right, he said finally. Courage alone isn't enough. But courage combined with the right strategy might be. He looked at each alien commander in turn. I'm not asking you to follow us into battle. Keep your ships here and protect the civilian evacuation ships. But don't surrender yet. Give us those. 3 days. Queen Nasara's antenna twitched. What can you possibly do in 3 days that we couldn't do in 3 years? Morrison's smile returned, but this time it was different. It was the smile of someone who knew something that others didn't, something important. We're going to show the Vorth why they were smart to avoid human space, he said. And we're going to teach them that avoiding us was their biggest mistake. The human fleet floated in the darkness between the stars, 27 ships preparing for what seemed like certain death. But inside the USS Dakota, Admiral Morrison's crew worked with a calmness that would have surprised their alien allies. They weren't preparing to die. They were preparing to win. Dr. Amanda Price stood in the ship's main laboratory, surrounded by glowing screens and quantum computers. She had been working for 18 hours straight, but her eyes were bright with excitement. In her hands, she held a small device that looked like nothing more than a metal cube. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Admiral, it's ready, she said into her communication device. Morrison's voice came back immediately. How sure are you, Amanda? Price smiled. 97%. The simulations all show the same result. Their quantum network is their greatest strength, but it's also their greatest weakness. They never considered that someone might use chaos theory against ordered systems. While Price worked on her project, Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Bell prepared his Marines for the most dangerous mission of their lives. The men and women under his command were the best soldiers Earth had ever produced. They had trained for every possible combat situation, including boarding enemy ships in the middle of battle. Bell stood before 30 Marines in the ship's briefing room. Their powered armor was black and silver, designed to work in the vacuum of space. Each suit was equipped with weapons that could cut through alien metal and shields that could stop energy blasts. "Listen up," Bell said. "We're going to board a Vorth command ship. These aliens are 3 times our size and twice as strong. Their ships are filled with poisonous gas that will kill us in seconds without our suits. But we have something they don't expect." He activated a holographic display showing the interior of a Vorth vessel. "They think we're primitive. They think we'll fight like the other species, with honor and straight attacks. They're wrong. We're going to be sneaky, fast, and absolutely ruthless." The Marines nodded. They had studied the recordings of Vorth battles. The enemy expected their opponents to fight like warriors. Humans were going to fight like hunters. In the engineering section of the ship, Chief Engineer Karen Stone put the finishing touches on their secret weapon. She had been working on it for 6 months, ever since they first captured a piece of Vorth technology. The other alien species had tried to build bigger weapons to fight the enemy. Humans had decided to build a smarter weapon. "Computer virus Pandora's box is ready for deployment," she announced to her team. "It's based on the old logic bomb concept from Earth, but adapted for quantum computing systems. Once it gets into their network, it will spread faster than they can stop it." Her assistant, a young engineer named Pete Clark, looked worried. "What if it doesn't work? What if their systems are too different?" Stone smiled. "Pete, humans have been breaking into computer systems since we invented computers. These aliens might be advanced, but they still think in patterns, and patterns can always be broken." Across the fleet, similar preparations were taking place. Captain Danny Wright of the destroyer USS Phoenix was modifying his ship's engines for maximum speed. His vessel would have to get close to the enemy command ship and survive long enough for the Marines to board it. It was a suicide mission, but Wright had volunteered without hesitation. "Sir, are you sure about this?" asked his navigation officer, Lieutenant Sam Turner. Wright nodded. "Sam, my grandfather fought in World War II. He told me that sometimes the best way to win is to do something so crazy that the enemy never sees it coming. The Vorth expect us to fight them with big weapons and dramatic tactics. We're going to fight them with sneakiness and computer viruses." On the communication deck, Lieutenant Amy Foster was preparing the psychological warfare component of their plan. She had studied every recording of Vorth battles, analyzing their communication patterns and behavioral responses. The Vorth fought with perfect coordination because they believed in their superiority. Their battle meditation rituals happen on specific frequencies, she explained to her team. If we broadcast on those same frequencies, we can disrupt their mental synchronization. They'll start making mistakes without even realizing why. Foster had prepared dozens of fake messages designed to confuse the enemy. Some described fictional human superweapons. Others gave technical specifications for imaginary technologies. All of them were carefully crafted to plant seeds of doubt in Vorth minds. Admiral Morrison walked through the ship, checking on each team's progress. His crew looked up at him with confidence and trust. They believed in their plan because they believed in him. More importantly, they believed in the human way of fighting. "Dr. Price, how long until we can deploy the virus?" he asked. "We need physical contact with their command ship, sir. The virus has to be uploaded directly into their quantum core. Once it's in their system, it will spread to every ship in their fleet within minutes." Morrison nodded and moved to the next station. "Colonel Bell, are your Marines ready?" "Ready and eager, sir. We've trained for this exact scenario. Get us to that ship, and we'll get the job done." "Chief Stone, what about our defensive systems?" "All ships are ready, Admiral. We've modified our shields to look weaker than they are. When the Vorth attack, they'll think they're winning right up until the moment they lose everything." Morrison felt a surge of pride in his species. While the alien races had tried to fight the Vorth with honor and traditional tactics, humans had approached the problem like engineers solving a puzzle. They had studied their enemy, found the weaknesses, and designed a solution. The plan was elegant in simplicity. The Vorth used quantum entanglement to coordinate their entire fleet. Every ship was connected to every other ship through a network that allowed instant communication across vast distances. The aliens thought this made them unbeatable. Humans had realized it made them vulnerable. Admiral, incoming message from the alien fleet, reported Communication Officer Lisa Chun. Morrison activated the main screen. Queen Thesara's image appeared, her compound eyes reflecting worry and confusion. Admiral Morrison, our sensors show your fleet moving into attack position. This is madness. You cannot defeat 3,000 ships with 27. Morrison smiled. Your Majesty, you're thinking like a Vorth. You're thinking about ship-to-ship combat, weapon strength, and numerical superiority. We're thinking about network vulnerabilities, psychological warfare, and cascade failures. The alien queen's antenna twitched in confusion. I don't understand. You will, Morrison replied. In about 2 days, everyone in the galaxy will understand why the Vorth avoided human space. They weren't being cautious. They were being smart. Unfortunately for them, they stopped being smart when they decided to attack our allies. He ended the communication and turned to his crew. All stations, final preparations. In 48 hours, we're going to show the galaxy what humans can do when someone threatens our friends. The bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. Each person focused on their part of the plan. They weren't the strongest species in the galaxy. They weren't the most advanced. But they were the most unpredictable, and sometimes that was enough. Outside the ship, the stars waited in silence. Somewhere in that darkness, 3,000 enemy ships were approaching. They expected to find a desperate last stand by primitive humans. Instead, they were going to discover why underestimating humanity was the last mistake many species ever made. The space around Kepler 442 suddenly filled with the massive shapes of enemy ships as the Vorth Armada dropped out of hyperspace. 3,000 vessels appeared like a dark cloud blocking out the stars. Each ship was enormous, bristling with weapons that could destroy entire planets. The largest vessel, the dreadnought Vorth Kaler, stretched 15 kilometers from front to back. On the bridge of his flagship, Supreme Commander Thektar studied the tactical displays with satisfaction. His red eyes glowed in the dim light as he observed the pathetic remains of the Galactic Defense Coalition. The alien fleet huddled near the gas giant's rings like frightened children hiding behind their mother's skirt. Status report, Thektar commanded in his deep rumbling voice. All ships in position, Supreme Commander, replied his tactical officer. The Coalition fleet consists of 55 vessels. However, there is an anomaly. Thektar's massive head turned toward the officer. Explain. A small human fleet has positioned itself between our armada and the Coalition forces. 27 ships, all of primitive design. The Supreme Commander laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Humans? The newcomer species thinks they can challenge the might of the Vorth Empire. How amusing. He activated the main display and examined the human fleet. The ships were tiny compared to his vessels. Their weapons looked crude and their armor thin. It was like watching insects trying to stop a stampeding herd of massive beasts. They must be planning to sacrifice themselves for honor, observed his second-in-command. A futile gesture, but typical of lesser species. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Dakota, watching as 3,000 enemy ships arranged themselves in perfect attack formation. His crew worked calmly around him, following procedures they had practiced hundreds of times. The alien commanders would have been amazed at how relaxed the humans appeared. Sir, the Vorth are trying to communicate with us. reported Communication Officer Lisa Chun. Put them through, Morrison said. The main screen flickered and showed the terrifying face of Supreme Commander Vector. The alien leader's red eyes burned with cruel intelligence, and his mouth was filled with sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. Human Admiral, Vector's voice boomed through the bridge speakers. I am Supreme Commander Vector of the Vorth Empire. You will surrender your fleet immediately, or we will destroy you along with your alien allies. Morrison stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked completely calm, as if he were discussing the weather instead of facing certain death. Supreme Commander, I'm Admiral Jake Morrison of the human fleet. I have a counter-offer for you. Vector's eyes narrowed with interest. You dare make demands? Speak quickly, before I lose patience. You have 10 minutes to withdraw from this system before we demonstrate why your empire was smart to avoid human space. Here are the coordinates for a safe retreat route. The silence that followed was complete. Even Morrison's own crew stopped what they were doing to stare at their admiral. The man had just told 3,000 enemy ships to run away, or face the consequences. Vector's face twisted with rage and disbelief. You mock me? 27 primitive ships against 3,000. Of the most advanced vessels in the galaxy? I'm not mocking you, Morrison replied calmly. I'm giving you a chance to save your fleet, your choice. The communication ended abruptly. On the Vorth flagship, Supreme Commander Vector stared at the blank screen in amazement. No species had ever spoken to him with such confidence. The other races always begged for mercy or made desperate last stands. These humans acted as if they had already won. Sir, our intelligence reports confirm that human technology is primitive, his tactical officer said nervously. Their weapons are chemical-based projectiles and simple energy beams. Their shields are electromagnetic barriers. Nothing that could threaten our ships. Vector nodded slowly, but something bothered him about the human admiral's confidence. What do we know about human military history? Very little, sir. They've only been in space for 50 years. Before that, they fought wars on their home planet using crude weapons. Show me recordings of their recent battles. The tactical display showed several engagements between human ships and space pirates. The battles were short and brutal. Human ships moved with surprising speed and coordination, but their weapons were clearly inferior to Vorth technology. They fight well for primitives, Vector admitted, but they cannot possibly have weapons capable of threatening our fleet. Meanwhile, Dr. Amanda Price was making final adjustments to the virus program aboard the USS Dakota. She had spent years studying Vorth technology, looking for weaknesses that other species had missed. The breakthrough came when she realized that the enemy's greatest strength was also their greatest vulnerability. Admiral, Pandora's box is ready for deployment, she announced. The virus will spread through their quantum network faster than they can react. Once we get it into their system, every ship in their fleet will be affected within minutes. Lieutenant Amy Foster activated the psychological warfare systems. She began broadcasting on frequencies that would interfere with Vorth battle meditation rituals. The messages were carefully designed to plant doubt and confusion in enemy minds, broadcasting fake technical specifications for imaginary human superweapons, she reported. Also transmitting fictional battle reports describing human victories over impossible odds. Supreme Commander Vector received reports of strange transmissions from the human fleet. His communication officers were puzzled by the technical data they were intercepting. The humans seemed to be discussing weapons and technologies that didn't match their primitive appearance. Could they be hiding advanced capabilities? Some of it described weapons that could destroy entire fleets with a single shot. Other transmissions mentioned shield technologies that could deflect any attack. All of it was impossible based on what they knew about human development. It must be bluffing, he decided. No species developed such advanced technology in only 50 years of space travel. But doubt crept into his mind. Why would the human admiral be so confident if he didn't have a reason? Why position such a small fleet between the Vorth Armada and the coalition forces unless they truly believed they could win? Captain Danny Wright of the destroyer USS Phoenix began his approach run toward the Vorth command ship. His vessel was escorted by 2 other human ships, making it look like a desperate suicide attack. In reality, it was a precisely planned insertion mission. "All stop," Wright ordered as his ship reached the optimal position. "Launch boarding pods on my mark." The pods were invisible to Vorth sensors, modified with human stealth technology that used principles the aliens had never encountered. They streaked through space toward the massive enemy flagship like silent arrows seeking their target. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Bell and his Marines prepared for boarding action inside their pods. Each soldier checked their weapons and life support systems one final time. They knew they might not survive the mission, but they also knew that success would save millions of lives. "Remember," Bell told his troops over the communication system, "we're not here to fight fair. We're here to win. Get to that quantum core and upload the virus. Everything else is secondary." Supreme Commander Thektar made his decision. The humans were obviously bluffing, trying to trick him with fake transmissions and desperate bravado. He would teach them the price of challenging the Vorth Empire. "All ships, advance to attack position," he commanded. "I want those human vessels destroyed quickly. Then we'll finish off the coalition fleet." The massive armada began moving forward, 3,000 ships preparing to crush 27 human vessels. But as they advanced, strange things began happening to their communication systems. Minor errors crept into their coordination protocols. Weapons targeting systems experienced tiny delays. Admiral Morrison watched the enemy fleet approach and smiled. The virus was already beginning its work, spreading through the Vorth quantum network like a digital infection. Soon, the most powerful armada in galactic history would discover what happened when they underestimated human ingenuity. The battle was about to begin, but in many ways, it was already over. The first Vorth plasma beams lanced through space toward the human fleet like spears of pure energy. Each beam carried enough power to vaporize a city, but the human ships danced between the attacks with impossible grace. They moved as if they could see the future, dodging death by mere meters. On the bridge of the USS Dakota, Admiral Morrison watched his fleet perform the dance they had practiced for months. Every movement was calculated, every turn planned to perfection. The Vorth expected their enemies to fight back with desperate fury. Instead, the humans moved like ghosts, avoiding damage while steadily closing the distance to their targets. "Evasive Pattern 7, Commander Lisa Harper called. "Out. All ships maintain formation Delta." The human vessels twisted and spun through the deadly light show, their pilots using skills learned from years of asteroid mining and dangerous cargo runs. What looked like cowardly retreating to the Vorth was actually a carefully planned approach. Pattern. Supreme Commander Thektar watched the battle from his flagship with growing frustration. His weapons officers were firing everything they had, but the tiny human ships kept slipping away. Worse, his fleet's coordination was starting to break down. Ships that should move together were making small errors in timing. "What's wrong with our targeting systems?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir," replied his tactical officer. "We're experiencing minor delays in all systems. Nothing serious, but enough to affect accuracy." Thektar didn't know that Dr. Amanda Price's virus was already spreading through his fleet's quantum network like a cancer. Each infected ship passed the virus to others through their communication links. The effect was subtle at first, just tiny errors and small delays. But it was growing stronger every second. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Bell's boarding pod slammed into the hull of the Vorth flagship with a metallic crash. The impact would have killed an unprotected human, but Bell and his Marines were wearing the most advanced combat armor Earth had ever built. They felt the crash as nothing more than a hard bump. "Breaching charges ready," reported Sergeant Mike Torres, the team's demolition expert. "Do it," Bell ordered. The charges exploded in a bright flash, cutting through the alien metal like it was paper. The Marines poured through the hole into the toxic atmosphere of the Vorth ship. Their armor's life support systems kicked in immediately, protecting them from the poisonous gases that filled the enemy vessel. The interior of the Vorth ship was a nightmare of twisted metal and pulsing organic components. The walls seemed to breathe, and strange lights flickered in patterns that hurt human eyes to look at. But the Marines had trained for this exact environment. "Move fast and stay together," Bell commanded. "We have 15 minutes to reach the quantum core before they realize we're here." Captain Danny Wright watched his destroyer USS Phoenix take hit after hit from Vorth weapons. His ship's shields were failing, and hull breaches were appearing all over the vessel. But Wright smiled as he watched the enemy fire focus on him. Every shot aimed at his ship was one less shot aimed at the boarding pods. "Sir, we need to evacuate," his first officer, Lieutenant Sam Turner, said urgently. "The ship won't last much longer." "Not yet," Wright replied. "Give the Marines 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes, and this will all be worth it." The Phoenix shuddered under another plasma blast. Warning lights flashed throughout the bridge as systems failed one by one. But Wright held his position, drawing enemy fire like a magnet attracts metal. Inside the Vorth flagship, Bell's Marines fought their way through corridors filled with enemy soldiers. The Vorth warriors were huge, standing nearly 3 meters, tall and covered in natural armor. Their weapons shot bolts of dark energy that could melt steel, but the Marines had trained for this. They moved in perfect coordination, using their smaller size and superior speed to outmaneuver the massive aliens. Sergeant Torres threw a grenade that exploded in a burst of electromagnetic energy, temporarily blinding the Vorth soldiers. Private Janet White and Corporal Alex Kim flanked the confused enemies while Bell and the others pushed forward. "Quantum core is 50 meters ahead," reported the team's tech specialist, Corporal Lisa Brown. Her armor's sensors had mapped the ship's interior during their advance. Dr. Price monitored the virus's progress from the USS Dakota. Her screens showed the infection spreading from ship to ship like ripples in a pond. The Vorth didn't even realize what was happening to them. Their quantum network, designed to be their greatest strength, was becoming the pathway for their destruction. "Admiral, the virus has infected 2,000 ships," she reported excitedly. "It's spreading faster than our best estimates." Morrison nodded without taking his eyes off the tactical display. The human fleet was still dancing between enemy fire, but several ships had taken damage. The USS Phoenix was clearly dying her hull glowing red from repeated hits. "Danny, get your people out of there," Morrison ordered over the communication system. Wright's voice came back filled with static. "Negative, sir. The Marines need more time. We'll hold position." On the Vorth flagship, Bell's team reached the quantum core chamber. The room was enormous, filled with crystalline structures that pulsed with strange energy. At the center stood a tower of pure light that hurt to look at directly. This was the heart of the Vorth fleet's coordination system. "This is it, Corporal," Brown announced. "I need 2 minutes to upload the virus directly into their core system." Bell and his Marines formed a defensive circle around her while she worked. The Vorth had finally realized they were being boarded, and the sound of running feet echoed through the corridors. Enemy soldiers would be here soon. "Contact front," Sergeant Torres called out as the first Vorth warriors appeared at the chamber. Entrance. The battle was fierce, but brief. The Marines used every trick they had learned, fighting with a ruthlessness that shocked their alien enemies. They threw grenades, fired armor-piercing rounds, and used their smaller size to hide behind the crystal structures. "Upload complete," Brown announced just as the last Marine's ammunition ran out. Bell felt a moment of pure satisfaction. They had done it. The virus was now in the heart of the Vorth Fleet's network, ready to execute its final phase. Dr. Price watched her screens as the virus reached critical mass. All across the enemy fleet, quantum systems began to overload. The careful coordination that made the Vorth so dangerous started to collapse like a house of cards. "Activating final phase," she announced. The USS Phoenix finally exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Captain Wright and his crew had held their position until the last possible second, giving the Marines time to complete their mission. Their sacrifice would be remembered as one of the most heroic acts in human history. Supreme Commander Vector stared at his tactical displays in growing horror. Ship after ship was reporting system failures. Weapons stopped firing, shields went down, and engines shut off. In the space of 30 seconds, his mighty armada was transformed from the galaxy's most feared fleet into a collection of drifting hulks. "What's happening?" he roared. "Unknown, sir," his tactical officer replied in panic. "All systems are failing simultaneously. It's impossible." But it wasn't impossible. It was just something the Vorth had never imagined. While they built bigger weapons and stronger ships, humans had learned to turn their enemies' strengths against them. The quantum network that gave the Vorth their perfect coordination had become the delivery system for their total defeat. Admiral Morrison opened a communication channel to the enemy flagship. When Supreme Commander Vector's face appeared on the screen, it was no longer filled with arrogance. Instead, Morrison saw fear, confusion, and the first stirrings of respect. "Supreme Commander," Morrison said calmly, "your fleet is finished. You have 60 seconds to surrender unconditionally, or you can drift here until your life support fails. Your choice." The silence that followed was the sound of an empire crumbling. The silence that followed Supreme Commander Vector's surrender was like the quiet after a thunderstorm. 3,000 massive Vorth ships floated helplessly in space, their weapons dead and their engines cold. The most feared fleet in galactic history had been defeated by 27 human vessels without losing a single ship to enemy fire. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Dakota and watched as his fleet moved among the disabled enemy ships like shepherds among sleeping sheep. The alien coalition forces, who had been preparing for a desperate final battle, could only stare in amazement at what they had witnessed. "Sir, incoming transmission from Queen Nasara," reported Communication Officer Lisa Chun, the Insect Queen's image appeared on the main screen. Her compound eyes were wide with disbelief, and her antennae twitched with nervous energy. "Admiral Morrison," she said in her clicking voice, "how is this possible? We have fought the Vorth for 3 years, and never achieved anything like this," Morrison smiled. "Your Majesty, you fought them with honor and courage. We fought them with science and cunning. Sometimes the smallest key can open the biggest lock." Dr. Amanda Price was busy explaining the technical details to the coalition scientists who had gathered around her laboratory. The alien researchers listened with growing amazement as she described how humans had turned the Vorth's greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The quantum entanglement network was supposed to be unbreachable, she explained to General Kethmer of the Crystalline Nexari. They never considered that someone might introduce chaos theory into their ordered systems. Our virus didn't break their network. It convinced their network to break itself. Captain Zextol of the Aquarians, who had been ready to surrender just days before, now looked at the human fleet with something approaching worship. "Your species accomplished in minutes what we could not do in years. How did you know it would work?" "We didn't," Morrison admitted. "But we knew that doing nothing would guarantee our defeat. Sometimes you have to risk everything on a plan that might work instead of accepting a future that definitely won't." Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Bell and his surviving Marines were rescued from the Vorth flagship after successfully completing their mission. Of the 30 soldiers who had boarded the enemy ship, 23 had survived the fighting. They were treated as heroes by every species in the coalition, but Bell himself seemed more interested in honoring the memory of Captain Wright and the crew of the USS Phoenix. "They died so that we could live," he told the gathered reporters from across the galaxy. "Danny Wright was the bravest man I ever knew. He held position until the last second, giving us time to save everyone." The news of humanity's victory spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. Species that had barely heard of humans suddenly recognized them as the most dangerous military force in known space. Worlds that had been under Vorth control declared independence. The empire that had ruled through fear and superior technology crumbled in a matter of weeks. Supreme Commander Vectar sat in a human prison cell aboard the USS Dakota, waiting to be transported to face war crimes trials. He had requested a meeting with Admiral Morrison, claiming he wanted to understand how his defeat had been possible. "Your species is truly remarkable," Vectar said when Morrison visited his cell. "We studied your military history before this war began. You fight among yourselves constantly, using primitive weapons and crude tactics. How did you develop such advanced strategies?" Morrison sat down across from the former enemy commander. "That's exactly why we won. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've learned every dirty trick, every sneaky tactic, every way to turn an enemy's strength against them. You conquered species that fought with honor. We don't fight with honor, we fight to win." Vectar nodded slowly. "We underestimated the cunning of your species. That was our fatal mistake." The Galactic Defense Coalition held a massive celebration. On the space station orbiting Kepler 442b, representatives from dozens of species gathered to honor the human fleet that had saved them all. Admiral Morrison found himself promoted to Supreme Allied Commander, with authority over all Coalition military forces. Chief Engineer Karen Stone received the Coalition's highest scientific award for developing the virus that had defeated the Vorth. She used her acceptance speech to praise the team effort that had made victory possible. "No single person won this war," she told the assembled delegates. "It took scientists, soldiers, engineers, and pilots all working together. That's the human way. We don't have the strongest individuals, but we have the strongest teams." Dr. Price was offered research positions at universities throughout the galaxy, but she chose to stay with the human fleet. She wanted to continue studying alien technology, looking for ways to defend against future threats. "There are always new enemies out there," she explained to Morrison. "We need to be ready for whatever comes next." The former Vorth Empire was reorganized into a federation of free worlds, protected by coalition forces and governed by representatives from all the liberated species. The Vorth themselves were relocated to a monitored world, where they could rebuild their society without the tools of conquest. Many Vorth chose to serve in the new Federation's defense forces, working alongside the species they had once oppressed. They brought valuable knowledge about threats from outside the galaxy, warning of other empires that might one day challenge the Coalition. Captain Danny Wright was posthumously awarded the Coalition Medal of Honor, the highest decoration for bravery. A new class of human destroyers was named after him, ensuring that his sacrifice would never be forgotten. Lieutenant Amy Foster's psychological warfare techniques became required study at military academies throughout the galaxy. Her methods for disrupting enemy coordination were adopted by every species in the Coalition. Admiral Morrison stood on the observation deck of the USS Dakota 6 months after the victory, looking out at the stars and thinking about the future. Commander Harper joined him, carrying reports about new exploration missions. "Sir, the Council has approved our request to explore the Outer Rim," she said. 12 ships headed for uncharted space. We leave next month. Morrison nodded. The war was over, but humanity's journey among the stars was just beginning. They had proven themselves as warriors and protectors. Now it was time to prove themselves as explorers and builders of peace. Lisa, do you think we'll find more enemies out there? Harper smiled. Probably, sir, but I'm not worried anymore. We've shown the galaxy what humans can do when someone threatens our friends. Any enemy we meet will learn the same lesson the Vorth did. What lesson is that? Never underestimate the species that turned warfare into a science and made victory inevitable. Through preparation and cleverness. Morrison looked out at the infinite expanse of space, filled with unknown worlds and undiscovered civilizations. Somewhere out there, new challenges waited, but humanity was ready for them. They had proven that the smallest force could achieve the impossible when guided by human ingenuity and determination. The galaxy was vast and full of mysteries, but it was no longer a dangerous place for those under human protection. The species that had once seemed primitive and insignificant had become the guardians of galactic peace, and every civilization in known space understood one simple truth: where humans went, victory followed.